It's not easy translating ideas into tangible impact in healthcare, especially when doing so involves software and advanced analytics. So, how can healthcare providers and other organizations without software developers get their solutions to market? Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the Health Biz podcast, where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is RJ Kedziora, co founder and COO of Estenda, which develops custom software, data analysis, and AI solutions for healthcare and medtech. Do you like this show? If so, please subscribe and leave a review. RJ, welcome to the Health Biz podcast.
David, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Outstanding. Well, I'm very interested in what you're doing at Estenda and have been doing for a while. But I want to start off by how you started off and ask about your background, your upbringing. What was your childhood like? Any influences that have stuck with you in your career?
Yeah, I'm a child of the '70s, so grew up running around in the woods behind the house, having fun, biking down to the swim club, on the weekends. And early on, I was fortunate that my parents were able to buy a personal computer, an IBM PC Junior. And we had the Atari, and played my fair share of games, but was very fascinated at an early stage of what could I do with the computer. And even back then, started programming and just simple little things of like, how do I get the cursor to move around the screen? But it was just fascinating to me what the computer was capable of even back then. And today it's mind blowing what you can accomplish and much more easily. So I went my collegiate career in the early '90s. I went in with the intention of getting a PhD in artificial intelligence. And I find it amusing because AI has sort of blown up on the
Yeah.
scene today, but it's been around for a long time. And that was my intent going into college until my senior year when I got that job offer. I was like, okay, do I continue academic and take on more debt or go out in the world and, earn a living? So I did choose to go out in the world and earn that living, and very happy that I did. And I've always had my hand in AI systems over the years, as they've gone through different iterations. Um, so it's been fascinating.
Well, that sounds like a good approach. I may have been just a little bit ahead of you because I remember before the IBM PC Junior. What I remember about the PC Junior, sometimes they called it the chiclet. It had like chiclet keyboard or something on it. But and I didn't have a Atari game station, but I did actually have an Atari computer. I think it was the Atari 2600 was the game station. I had the Atari 800 and the
Nice.
400, which actually had even the membrane keyboard that was worse
Yeah.
than that. A 6502 processor used to crash, but it an overheat. That was the big thing. But it was really cool to have it. Did you have the modem with the acoustic coupler?
Had that.
Yeah,
The fascinating thing about the PC Junior was it did have a wireless keyboard,
nice.
so you could work across the room. And so to manage that, it had a 20-point font. So you wouldn't get much on the
Yeah,
screen at any one point in time, but to see it across the room, it had to be pretty big. So that was always interesting and fun to do it. Yeah, it's still, that computer did have the 5.5 floppy drive
right.
and cartridges, in combination to work
Yeah,
on various systems. MS DOS is pre-Windows kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And even in high school, we were fortunate. My junior year, they got a computer lab, and so was introduced to other programming languages and Pascal and C
Nice.
back then. So that just really drove my passion. And I did get a degree in computer science. That was the basics, minor in psychology, because part of that AI was just a fascination of the brain, the mind, and everything around that. And it
Yeah,
still drives me today, very much fascinated by
that sounds good. Well, it's good if you can have those sort of foundational things that then lead to a career. And it sounded like you started off in doing software development originally and some consulting. And what did you gonna get out of that? Before going and deciding that Estenda was going to be your thing.
Yeah, I did. When I graduated, I worked through a variety of large Fortune 50 organizations, some smaller companies, consulting, big and small, sort of discover where did I really fit in the world and what did I enjoy doing. It was through the '90s, the internet boom, and how could I play in that. was fascinating to me in how do I make my mark on the world. And while software and coding is essential and is very important, what I learned early on was the idea that what's more important is that end user empathy and understanding who you are developing for and what you're developing for. The idea of communication, like you could be the smartest person, but if you can't communicate, if you can't understand that user's perspective that you're developing for, that solution is not going to work as well as it could be. And so realizing that early on was like, okay, where can I make a biggest impact in healthcare? Back in the early 2000s, pre-smartphone, pre-social media and everything, EMRs weren't a major thing. They existed, but they weren't a major thing in the early 2000s. So I was like, yeah, what industry did I want to make a mark on and take on as a challenge? And it was healthcare.
That sounds good. So, healthcare has always been a pretty big part of the economy, a lot bigger now, even than it was in the early 2000s, and kind of behind when it comes to technology. And that was, as you say before, there were EMRs, but it was before the High Tech Act, it was before the Affordable Care Act, and so on. So, what did you see as the original kind of unmet need, and what was the status of what was, I forget, there's been a few iterations, but what we now call digital health, maybe we were calling it e-health, I think at the time. Maybe it was something had a different name before that. Maybe I'll be able to remember that. But what was going on in that environment as of 20 years ago?
Yeah, it was. I think healthcare has always embraced technology. Like,
Yeah,
so there is a lot of, diagnostic equipment out there, MRIs, X-rays, and stuff like that. So they have embraced technology. I think from my perspective, they haven't embraced data. They're the last industry to really embrace data, and that
yeah,
was as we started Estenda in those early stages. That's what it was all about. How do we gather this data that is available? How do we gather more information to create a better picture of a patient? We were fortunate in those early days that we had a congressional grant for the development of a diabetes disease management solution with military healthcare. So we got to work with Walter Reed Army Medical Center, the Boston VA, the Indian Health Services. Still working with Joslin Diabetes Center that was part of that today, 20 plus years later, still working with the Indian Health Services today. So been a great journey with those groups. But back then it was okay, how do we get more information about what's happening with the patient? How do we share that with your healthcare practitioner so they can better understand your sympathy, your condition, your experience? It comes back to that empathy. How does that physician understand what's going on with you, the nutritionist, the educator? How can we paint that better picture? So that's really what drove so much of what we were doing back then, of just how do we get this information?
yeah, makes sense. And what have you seen in terms of an evolution? I mean, you mentioned that when you started out, it was pre-EMR, pre-smartphone. I mentioned, pre-High Tech Act, and so on. What has been the evolution since then?
I tie it to that data, where is it was a challenge of getting the information. Now we're overwhelmed with the amount of information. How many biometric devices are on the market. I saw a infographic on LinkedIn a couple of days that was outlined all of the various different wearables you could measure information about your body.
Yeah,
Everybody's aware of like the rings and the watches to track heart rate and CG, continuous glucose meters to measure your glucose. You can measure your sweat. There's just all sorts of things. I just bought a Muse headband that can monitor your brain waves.
nice.
I haven't quite figured out what I'm doing with that just yet.
Yeah,
But it's just more information. And so that's the challenge today, is now there's just so much data that's out there that's available. How do we find the patterns? And this is where it's interesting is, our customers are a mix of like big Fortune 50 companies and then startups too. And as we have these conversations, it's like, oh, we have all this data. Let's find the patterns and show the user, whether it's the patient or the doctor, that pattern. And I'm always like, well, then what?
yeah,
What are they going to do with this? And so it's like trying to push that of like, okay, now we need to go beyond that and provide a recommendation. And okay, here's an inflection point in the patient's experience. call them up, interact with them. Or if we're developing a patient-focused app, they're using it. Okay, now is when we can surface some information, some educational information to help change their experience. So yeah, today it's now just there's so much information. What do you do with it? At the same time, there are still plenty of interoperability challenges in healthcare. There are new, better methods, but it's like for your money, you can go to any ATM in the world and
Yeah.
get your money out. Yes, healthcare data is more complex by many order of magnitudes, but we should be able to get there. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah, reflecting on what you're saying about data and how healthcare was slow to embrace data, now there's too much in a way. If I think back to the days of pre-EMR, you'd go into an office with these files, they pull out your Manila folder, and before an encounter physician at the time would kind of flip through it. Probably the stuff wasn't very legible, so they're like, all right, I'm not sure what's in here, let me ask. And so you had that pattern with a patient. And then when a lot of new information came out, and it started around that time too, people would come and have printouts, from the internet. And so the physician was worried they're going to have like all the stuff that they need to spend the whole appointment like disabusing them of whatever they saw on the internet. And then you'd have maybe these first either wearables or maybe let's say if you had a blood pressure monitor or something, and you print out all of your records. And so the first experiences dealing with data were actually not that great. And at the same time, if you fast forward to today, I was seeing there's at least some preliminary evidence that's getting some attention that looking at how well ChatGPT can do on diagnosis. And they'll say, and then there was an example that does well, better than doctors, but then it also said it did maybe better than doctors using ChatGPT because they override it or they don't know how to prompt or both. So anyway, it's an interesting evolution that you're describing. So I'd love to dig in a little bit about what you're seeing today. Like what's the state of the art and what are some of these friction points?
Yeah, yes, generative AI has burst on the scene. It's barely, I'm not sure the actual anniversary of ChatGPT's release, but it's November 2022. So we're right around there as we're recording this. So it's barely 2 years old, and it's already changing the world, changing education, changing healthcare. And I think a big aspect of it is we're all hoping it to be so much more.
Yeah.
And I feel like we have to accept it for what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make the most beneficial use of it? So, I don't know, there's been a number of these studies which have compared, the large language models and their ability to figure out what's going on with a patient case versus a physician. And I know there was one recently in the New York Times, but when you sort of dig into the actual underlying article, it was like 6 case studies.
Right.
So it wasn't a huge example set, and the physicians that were as comparators and using the AIs were not trained to use AI. So was it a great comparison? No. Was it interesting? Yes, it was interesting. And we have to embrace it. We have to use it, understand where it is and how to be that effective. Like, it's not replacing doctors. It's not replacing educators anytime soon, but we should use it. Doctors are people too. They're fallible. They can't remember. There's so much information that comes available, so much research, good research that's out there. We as individuals can't keep up with all that. The computers, the technology can. So some of the big use cases now in healthcare are ambient listening. So just like you're on your Teams or GoToMeeting or whatever technology you use, and it can scribe out the meeting so you don't have to take notes. That's being embedded into hospitals now, around the country, such that the computer can listen and take notes and transcribe it. On the other side, computers are very good at summarizing that information, the Gen AI system. So here's what's information. You reference those patient charts and trying to understand it. Well, EMRs were not really designed for patient care. They were designed for just capturing this information and billing purposes, probably above everything.
Yeah.
And so if you talk to 10 doctors, 10 of them will probably be like, yeah, I don't like my EMR. And so that makes it fascinating. Okay, how do I use the power of the technology to, one, listen to that conversation, let the doctor be a doctor, let the nurse be a nurse and do why they got into it, to work with the patients,
Yeah.
the human aspects of it instead of typing away at a keyboard. So let the computer listen to that. It can also focus on, what information is on that chart and is aware of the clinical research that is out there. And what I'm waiting for, and just, hey, if somebody wants to do this together, give me a call. But bring those things together and let the AI surface questions today to the doctor. And the doctor can then say, ooh, yeah, what about that? And so now we're really augmenting the physician's capabilities because they're just not aware of every little thing that's happening in the world. And maybe the AI picked up something in the conversation that the physician didn't, because they're 4 patients behind and it's lunchtime and they're hungry. They're human. And so there's a lot of power of what we can do with that technology. On the flip side of that, you asked about challenges. There are definitely risks. We have to be aware of those risks. That's why I phrase it as we have to embrace it where it's at, not where it's going to go. So there's a lot of that fear of the AI is going to replace the doctor. Well, it's not today. So as software developers are using AI more and more kind of thing to write code, the expectation is that they're looking at that code and understanding it. Well, I have the same expectation of my physician. It's like, yes, use the AI because I'm going to get a better treatment out of it. But, I want you to be involved. I want that human in the middle. And that's a major step in mitigating the risks there of making sure you have that human in the middle.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about where it might go. I like the point about just thinking about where it is today and focusing on that, because the human brain isn't designed to understand like an exponential change or something. So it's hard to, I could say, yeah, if this were 20% faster, what it would be like. But if it's a completely different paradigm, it's hard to do. I wonder whether some of these technologies, on the one hand, you can see how it could enable a physician, especially if they're open-minded with the idea about like, gee, here's what I don't really know. And this could actually open it up and I can use my, brain and training in order to do the interpretation. But I could also see it kind of, dumbing somebody down. So the same way, like if you're always flying on autopilot or always using the GPS, then if you try to navigate yourself, it's very difficult. I even think back to, going back to the era when you and I were growing up. I was the other day, I was at a volunteer event and they were trying to figure out, if they're going to have enough items for the bag packing for the next couple of days. And the director pulled out their iPhone. She's using the calculator function. She's saying like 55 plus 47 plus, and she wasn't getting it right. I said, just tell it to me. And, this plus this minus that. And I always have it right away. And there were a couple of high school kids there and they'd never seen anything like that, and it's, I think they never would have any idea of how to contemplate it. So I do get concerned about people. Yeah, initially, sure, they're going to interpret it maybe if they've done it before, but if you're just coming into it, you don't know anything about programming, just know about prompting. Where are we going to be?
So what I find this conversation fascinating because people in the Middle Ages and even in the 19th century were having the same conversations about books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are books going to ruin our ability to understand and comprehend information and remember information? Because now it's in the books and I just have to go read it. Well, that obviously has not proven true.
Yeah.
The telephones, when they came around, everyone's like, you can't use the telephone. You got to go talk to the person in, like face to face. The telephone's horrible.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And so I think the challenge with technology today is it's happening faster and faster and faster. So we have less time to absorb it as a society. So the internet, we all thought this was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. But we've seen a lot of challenges, unexpected challenges in how it turned out and how it implemented it. It was going to bring us all together. Well, it's probably separated us in many different ways. So we have to definitely, be cautious and careful of what it can do and the over-reliance on it. But it's also going to change how we interact with the world to empower us to accomplish greater things. And so I really look forward to seeing that come about as we progress here.
Let me ask you a concrete kind of a question. I know your company is ISO 13485 certified. I don't know what that means, and I didn't put it into my LLM to check it out.
There you go. Yes, ask your LLM, and then if you still don't understand it, say, hey, can you explain that to me like a fifth grader?
Yeah.
And it will do just that for you, which is a fascinating use of the technology.
Yeah.
At 13485 is how we usually read the numbers out. At the really base level of it, it's a quality management system. We have a well developed, documented quality management system, and we've been certified in the use of this. We get audited independently. We independently audit ourselves. We have third party auditors. Our customers audit us. It always makes these experiences fun. Because they come in and it's like, okay, are you following your process? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay. So it's that cross check. But what it does for us as we are developing these solutions for various different customers, it makes sure we're thinking about all the individual things you need to think about. So it's very checklist driven, very process oriented. So when you go into a design process or a design review or a code review, say we're looking at your code, here are all the things we want to think about during that process. And as a, if you take a step back from a software development project, if you're creating, a process or data analytics system, it's like, what are your goals for accomplishing that? So we make sure that they're documented. That's part of that process. We make sure those questions are asked and answered. And the answer may be in the early stages of a project. We're not going to worry about that today.
Yeah.
But you've thought about it. So early on, you're not too much worried about performance and scalability because you're only going to have a dozen users. As you start growing, then yes, you have to think about that. Cybersecurity, think about that day one. Is very essential. So that's what the ISO 13485 is about, is a well-documented software development process.
Very good. Yeah, depending on the ISO, I think depends on the number how you pronounce it, because there's like ISO 27001, and they don't say ISO 271, because I think
Yeah.
you assume the zeros that are over there. So very interesting. All right,
Yeah.
so RJ, I feel this has been a fairly wide-ranging conversation so far, but let's actually widen it some more. And I was looking at what you were doing, and it looks like maybe a decade or so ago you were working for a cake company. Is that right?
Yes, and that does generate a lot of questions over the
Yeah.
years, even when I got involved in it. And it's fascinating because coming up from that software development background and experience, it's very algorithm driven. And so, like, I enjoy cooking, but baking is very specific. Like, you can't just take a bunch of ingredients and throw it together and out comes a cake. There's ratios as you're developing that cake recipe. A certain amount of flour needs a certain amount of fat, needs a certain amount of sugar, so it actually tastes good. And so, yeah, we had this idea of creating a cake. It was called Better Cake.
Yeah.
It was better for you. It was more nutritious, lower calories, all natural ingredients. It happened to be vegan. We were a little ahead of the vegan,
Yeah.
boom kind of thing. And it was everybody's, second job. I was the baker. I got to come up with the recipes, so I did that in my kitchen late at night. My girls were much younger then; they loved it because they were the taste testers. And then we moved to a commercial facility, and we got to the point where we did produce 5,000 pieces of cake, and we were at a bunch of shows and stuff like that. But as everybody's second job, it never really had the legs to go. So it was a fun experiment for a couple years there, and like I said, my girls loved it because they were the taste testers.
Well, one of my sons is a vegan, so if there's any leftover cake, maybe we'll do one. We've got a leftover bread that's getting ready to bake for this evening.
Yeah.
All right, so I asked you the question which I ask everybody about your childhood influences, and now I am thinking back to how you mentioned that you used to take your bike down to the swimming pool, and now I noticed that you're a triathlete. So did you run back? So what's it like being a triathlete?
It's an awesome experience being a triathlete. I love it.
Yeah.
It's very much there's a physical aspect to it.
Yeah.
Obviously, as you're out there, swim, bike, run kind of thing. But so much of why I enjoy it is the mental aspects of it. So when I get up at 4:30, 4:45, and it's pitch black out and it's cold, and okay, I need to get out there and do my training, need to jump in the pool and start swimming. I do some ocean swimming. It's like, oh, that just does not look like fun, but
Yeah.
get out there and do it. When it's 90 degrees and you got to go run, 10 mile, your 10-mile run, it's like, okay, grab some water, and grab some electrolytes, let's go. So that's a huge part of it, the mental aspect of
Yeah.
taking on the challenge. And I've done the adventure runs and things like that over the years. But I used to do the marathons, but that focused exercise was just too much
Yeah.
on my body. So triathlon gives me a lot of opportunity to use different muscle groups and
All right.
different movement patterns. So I have a goal of living. It's funny. I was saying I have a goal to live to 100
Yeah.
with a good quality of life. And someone said, why only 100? So
Okay.
I adjusted it. I have a goal of living to 100 plus with a good
Nice.
quality of life.
Nice. You know, as somebody who's involved in healthcare a lot, my usual advice to people, if they can do it, is, live to whatever age you're going to do, and then drop dead. Don't deal with the healthcare system if you can avoid it.
Yes.
But so anyway, good luck with that. All right. So the question, I usually have a last question for people, which is about any books that they have enjoyed reading that they would recommend. So I'll ask you about that. But then there's another one about what you're reading and what you're writing.
There you go. So thank you for the prompt. I am not an AI system, but what's fascinating is I've been on this journey for the last year. I am writing my first book, tentatively titled A Productive Harmony Framework, How to Be Productive in the 21st Century, where time management isn't really the first thing you should think about. It's really about energy management. And it ties into that triathlon experience. It's like you need sleep, you need to eat better, you need to move. You don't necessarily need to exercise or do a triathlon. You just need to move. And how do you guard your mental energy in all of this? And so out of that, I've been reading a ton of other books on productivity and how do you maximize that without burning out, which is a key aspect of this, particularly today. One of the books that I loved reading, which I highly recommend, was called When by Dan Pink.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about making decisions, it's very often like, what am I going to do or how am I going to do it? He asks the question of when.
Yeah.
And there's a core essential there, the idea of the chronotype. Are you a morning person or an evening person?
Yes.
And how does that drive your productivity within the day? I'm very much a morning person. So I should focus on things that take a lot of creation time and a lot of energy, mental energy in the morning. In the afternoon, after lunch kind of thing, regardless of what I eat kind of thing, I'm going to have a lull in that energy. So that's when I should be focusing on email and just the administrative tasks. And then I get another burst of sort of creativity and focus around dinner time, which my wife doesn't like so much.
Yeah.
Because I'm still, she's like, I'm hungry. I'm like, well, I'm productive. I'm trying to get this done. Kind of thing. So yeah, I would definitely I'll say Dan Pink's book When is worth picking up and reading. In my book, to be selfish, when it won't get published until like next fall, kind of thing.
Okay.
So, a work in progress, but Dan Pink When.
Great. All right, that's a good one. I think I listened to the Blinkist version of that one, so I don't know if I got it.
Yeah, he's definitely been out there on the podcast scene talking about it, so it's fascinating stuff.
Good. Well, RJ Kedziora, co-founder and COO of Estenda, triathlete, baker, reader, writer, thank you for joining me today on the Health Biz Podcast. You've been listening to the Health Biz Podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.